Hello, my name's Tim. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm wearing a different novelty Christmas jumper because holidays are coming. And today I'm going to talk to you about if it's worth your time, or if I think it's worth your time, reading The Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper. So this is 5 books. You've got Oversea Under Stone, The Dark is Rising, Green Witch, The Grey King, and Silver on the Tree. Those are the 5 books. All of them are short, certainly by today's standards. I think this was written in the 60s and 70s, maybe a bit into the 80s. The longest book is the last one, that's 250 pages in a mass market paperback. They're all between 200 and 250 pages, sometimes, you know. So what Brandon Sanderson would call a prologue. And George R.R. Martin would call 10 years of work. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, so this is a children's series. It's a children's fantasy series. It is set in our real world, and there's some magic that we don't know about. This follows 2 main groups of characters. You have the Drew children, Jane, Simon, and Barney, brothers and sisters, and then you have Will Stanton, the 7th son of a 7th son. And generally, one book focuses on each person, each group, and then the last 2 they come together, and you kind of alternate viewpoints between them. And these 2 groups of children are very different. So the Drews, as I'm going to call them, the Drew children, are all quote-unquote normal children. They're 3 siblings. They get on to varying levels depending on their moods. Simon is the oldest, then Jane, then Barney. I think, in terms of ages, I think they're like 13, 12, 8, something around there. Maybe a little bit younger at the start of the book, because the books do progress through time. But what they are is they are children, and they have a great uncle, Merry, or Gummerry as they call him. And Gummerry is incredibly wise and has seen so much of the world, and he has like a quality about him that they all really appreciate. And they end up in this situation where they end up looking for magic items. They're trying to stop bad people getting magic items, and that's most of their story. Then you have Will Stanton. So Will Stanton is thought he was a normal English boy. He is the 7th son of a 7th son. So his dad had 6 older brothers. He's got 6 older brothers and some older sisters. He's got a really big family. And on his 11th birthday, he discovers that he is something called an Old One. He has an innate, he is magical. He is one of the people that needs to save the world. He can do magic. He can see things. He can teleport himself through time, and he is extraordinary, which means he has an old head on a young body. He has an old soul and a different way of viewing things than other children do his age. These are the 2 main groups of characters. We found out Gummerry, Great Uncle Merry, is an Old One with Will. So Merry helps Will, and Merry helps the children. So these are the 2 groups. So what I talked about magic. What does the magic mean here? This is where I find it gets a bit challenging. The magic is about old England. Think pre-Anglo-Saxon. It's about history. It's about paganism. It's about King Arthur. It's about the old kingdoms of Britain. So it's about finding different items, a grail, a harp, a sword, to help beat back this evil force called the Dark. Will and Merry and the Drew children are on the side of the light. It's the light versus the dark. And it's interesting because the dark doesn't have a ton of power. They're not like big evil. They can't do magic or magic in the way that we think of now. But what they can do is they can make people do bad things. It's the dark is your negative emotions that you feel: prejudice, hatred, envy, greed, and the dark helps people push towards these things and do bad things, while the light is positive emotions and trying to push back against these dark thoughts. It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting concept. The thing is that each book has lots of talk of magic and magic items and the dark and the light going up against each other and travelling through time. It all gets very ethereal, unknowing. It's very vague. It's very vague. And quite often what happens is that you find out what the magic item does, the horn. You find out what it does about 2 pages before it's used. Even if that, sometimes they blow the horn and they don't know what's going to happen. And then something happens. That happens quite a lot. And Susan Cooper's prose is very good. It's very evocative of the environment and of emotions. But I found it really hard to understand what was actually happening. Because a lot of it is very metaphysical, and they're on a train that's going to somewhere, and then suddenly they're on a boat. And I'm like, what has just happened? Was the train real? Is the boat real? Is this all in their minds? Is this in our time? Is this in the past? What's going on? And eventually what they do is they find what they need to do is get all these magic items together to help another boy called Bran. Bran joins sides with Will to help them fight the dark. So the first book, Undersea Over Stone, is all the Drew children. The second book, The Dark is Rising, is all Will. The third book, The Green Witch, is all the Drew children. The fourth book, The Grey King, is mainly Will with Bran, and the Drew children are there slightly. And then the last book, Silver on the Tree, is both of them together, alternating as their viewpoints as they're off doing the quest that they need to do to help the light defeat the dark. Me personally, I found the Drew children far more interesting, which is surprising in a way because they're not interesting. They're ordinary. They don't have magic. They don't have magical powers and can travel to the past by themselves. They don't. But they're in the middle of it and they're trying to figure this out, and they also have each other to bounce off of. I found Will Stanton. He is an old head on young shoulders. He's an old soul, and it just meant he kind of knew what he had to do the whole time. And he had magic that could get him out of a lot of situations. And he didn't have many people to bounce ideas off or talk to. He talked to Merry. Certainly in The Dark is Rising, he talked to Merry because he was finding out that he was an old one and finding out these powers that he had. And then for The Grey King and Silver on the Tree, he talked to Bran. Bran is again another very interesting character who has lots of stuff going on. So they know what they have to do, so they don't explain it well to the reader what they have to do. They just know they have to go do the thing. And they're like, why are we going here? Because I feel like we must. That kind of thing happens a lot with Will. While with the Drews, they're like, what are we doing here? What's going on? And then someone else is like, you see, you have been teleported to the past for blah, 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 blah reason. And they're like, what do we have to do here? You need to get the thing. Oh, cool. How are we going to get the thing? They're asking questions, which the reader has, and other characters explain it to them. And I just enjoyed that style a lot more, personally, because I understood what was happening, I understood what they were trying to do, and also they had more people to bounce off. There was more threat, because quite a lot of the time they're like, the dark can't get to you, Will, because you're an old one. And I'm like, well, where's the tension here? So, in the end, the magic itself of teleporting through time and space and real places and fictional, not real places, I found interesting, but quite often they spent so long in these different time periods that I'd forgotten why they were there. That's an issue. Or they were time periods that were so vague, or places that were so vague that I didn't understand where they were. I feel like this got a bit better throughout the books. Um, like Oversea Understone doesn't have any teleporting time magic because it's just the Drew children trying to find something and trying to stop a bad guy. It's very set in our world. And then from The Dark is Rising, Will doesn't understand what's going on because he doesn't know his powers yet. So we don't really understand what's going on a lot of the time. Then The Green Witch, which is my favourite book. I think the third book, Green Witch, is my favourite. You follow the Drew children, and there's not that much teleporting through time, but you could see what the Dark are trying to do. You could tell who they are, and there's a real like pagan magic feel about it. There's one scene where there is kind of teleporting, but it's not the characters being teleported. It's they kind of teleport the time to them, and they see it in a vision. And I really liked that scene. The Grey King has more. The Grey King is probably my least favorite book. Maybe The Dark is Rising is my least favorite book because they're just so vague. And again, it's following Will, and he just has to do the thing. And they're like, why do you have to stop the Grey King? Because he is bad. Why do you need to do this thing? Because they are good. And I don't know why. And the real life tension in the characters, both the real people and Will that he's dealing with, and then the metaphysical threat of the Dark seem very disconnected, and I couldn't really understand what was going on. And then Silver on the Tree brings them both together, and again, I like the Drew children section more because they get teleported through time, and I think it's amazing. They get to see the wonder of it. And then Will goes to another land, and he's not as full of wonder. They're just very much like, we just got to go do this job. So they just go do it. And I've just thought of the analogy. It's, if you're reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and you see Harry Potter go to Diagon Alley, and he's like, wow, this is amazing. This is incredible. And you get that sense of wonder. Imagine if they wrote that scene, or even the book, from Ron Weasley's perspective. He knows what Diagon Alley is. He's been there every year with his brothers. So he's like, oh, I'm just going to go down to the broomstick shop. Oh, I'm just going to go to the owl shop. Oh, look, someone else has got their wand. Isn't that fun? Oh, I need this book. Doesn't have that sense of wonder to it. I think the Drew children have that Harry Potter, the outside view looking in, while Will he knows too much. So for me, I think there's no bad book, but I think they've all been between 3-4 stars for me. I don't know if this book series will stick with me. Maybe if you read this when you're younger, it has a much larger impact on you because these are written for children. Maybe that's the case, but I do read quite a lot of children's literature and can like pull out like, oh, that's a really good thing. I didn't get that from this. One thing as well, these are written in a time ago. The last book had some racist language in it, and it was said by a character who was being racist. So if you're reading this to your children, you might not want to use that term, but it is in the right context. It's not like, I would say it's far better than like the James Bond books, for example, which are full of racist language, which was just common use at the time. This isn't that case. It's the case of this person is saying that word, and everybody knows it's a bad word to say. And they are a bad person because they are saying that word. Just kind of highlighting that. So, would I recommend reading it? Maybe. I think, in terms of how far you should get to get a gauge, I think from the prose side, Undersea Understone, the first book, you'd be able to get a gauge on the vibe. But I think she wrote that, and then 10 years later wrote The Dark is Rising, and then after that kind of wrote them quite soon afterwards. I think The Dark is Rising is, if you read both of those, you get both viewpoints of both sets of characters, and you'll get a really strong gauge on what to read if you like it. So for me, I'm pleased that I've read it, and I kind of enjoyed all of them, but I also didn't love any of them. So, would I recommend reading it? No, I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't go, oh, you have to read this book. But if you told me that you were reading them, I'd be like, cool, have fun. I wouldn't be like, oh no, don't bother reading it. The ending's terrible, or, oh, I hate those books. I'm just very mid about it. I think it's a very mid series for me, and that's okay. But yeah, so if you've read them, especially if you read them as a child, let me know below. And we can talk about it, because have you read them as an adult? Have you read them as a child? Just let me know. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye. Get out of my house.